Hi, everybody. Welcome back to class. And as we've been trying to find some experts in the field to help us on discussing things like classroom discipline and classroom management, one of the organizations that we have here at Missouri State that works with a lot of school districts in Southwest Missouri is the Agency for Teaching, Leading, and Learning. Some parts of the state, they have different names. The regional professional development centers have different names, but the one for Southwest Missouri, that area from Springfield over to Joplin, is the Agency for Teaching, Leading, and Learning here at Missouri State University. It's part of the College of Education. And I've got Joanna Haskins here with us today from the Agency for Teaching, Leading, Learning, or also known as ATLL. Joanna, I hate to put you in a tough spot, but tell me a little bit about ATLL, Agency for Teaching, Leading, and Learning. You tell a little bit about what you do, but maybe some of the other resources that are out there, again, for these future teachers that may not know a thing about ATLL.
Yeah, even future teachers and even teachers that are in the field right now sometimes don't know about the resources available. A long time ago, before probably any of you were born in the 1980s, DESE decided that they could not handle all of the training for teachers. And so they started to outsource that. And over the last 30 years, they've added little bits more to our responsibility. And one of them is the teacher development system. That is what I do. And so in the state of Missouri, when you are ready to get your certification, you start out with an initial certification. Some of you may be getting a provisional license, some of you may be working on a subs, but in the state of Missouri, in order to upgrade to your career certificate, you must participate in a beginning teacher assistance program. That is a 2-year program that requires all teachers to just have some extra support in those first 2 years. Sometimes it's provided at the school, but a lot of the times it is provided through us. So what I love about the ATLL is that we give you the opportunity to interact with lots of new teachers from different schools, big schools, small schools, rural schools, suburban schools, and network that way and talk about what's happening in your school, what's happening in your classroom, and being able to navigate these first 2 years of teaching together. In addition, we have everything from math consultants, literacy consultants, the PBIS people, which is the positive behavior. We have special education, counseling, workforce, apprenticeships. There's so many things that you can do. There's a whole website that you can go and explore, and it's mostly free resources for teachers and schools.
And I appreciate that great summary there, Joanna. And again, I've been a teacher since 1988, and so I've been around a long time. And there are resources that are offered through the regional professional development centers like ATLL that I don't know about. And all the time when I'm out at different events or whatever, and for many years, ATLL's offices were right above mine, and I didn't know. I'm one floor below, and didn't know. So again, that website, and I'll make sure that the students have access to that website, just seeing all those resources out there. And we talk about this in education a lot. That's one of the things that requires the most bravery in education is to ask for help. We're reluctant
Yeah.
to ask for help. And especially, Joanne, and we could talk about that a bit. You're a beginning first year teacher. You're excited about your new job and you're having some challenges. And one of the first discussions you don't want to have with the principal is going down and saying, "Hey, I need help with controlling my class." So let's talk about that a little bit about as a, I don't know when you started being a teacher, Joanna, but maybe that's a good point to talk a little bit about your background and where you're coming from.
I actually am a non-traditional teacher. My first degree, my undergrad degree is in English, but I had 0 education classes with that. I decided the last semester of college that maybe I should have gotten some education classes, but there was no way I was gonna stay and add those to my undergrad, so I just graduated. I actually went and worked in the business world, but I still ended up doing training. So I worked for a home health agency here in Springfield and did all of their new training for their teachers. So that's how I got into it. Once I started having children, my husband is a pastor here in town and met some of the people at the church. And one of the guys was a principal at a small school between here and Joplin and said, "Hey, we need a librarian. Would you be interested? You seem to be really good with kids." And I was like, "Thanks. Yeah, that sounds like fun. I love to read. I like organizing. I think a librarian is great." He goes, "Okay, you're going to be teaching K through 6 library classes." Hold up a minute. I have no idea how to do that. I don't know what a lesson plan looks like. I can make it up. And so really I just got into the library and he taught me how to create a lesson. During that time, I ended up subbing a lot in the special education classroom of that school. There were less than 300 students. So if that tells you how small the school was. And so I was working a lot with a special education program, found out about the Teach Grant, and went back and got my master's in special education with a focus in special education. And so then I worked in special education or English in the English classroom for about 15 years. And during that time, taught everything from AP English down to Read 180, which is the high school kids that read at a second grade level. And then I did a lot of, like, that's when I started training and coaching teachers in special education. Most of my teaching career was in Arizona. I moved back here, worked with Springfield Public Schools for a year, and then I started at the ATLL. But a lot of my passion for kids comes from my family. So my husband and I have 4 children, 2 biological boys that are 19. One's a freshman at MSU and 14-year-old. And then we adopted 2 girls when we were in Arizona through the foster care system. One of those girls has transitioned really well. She was 6 whenever she came to us. She's now in 8th grade and is just doing really well. My youngest daughter is on the spectrum, has ADHD, dyslexia, and some social engagement disorders. And I have become an expert in the classroom of knowing how to advocate for her, but also learning that the things that work in the classroom also work in our home. And so figuring out a way to make sure that I don't lose my mind while I'm working with her at home.
I got it. And Joanna, I appreciate the things you're saying there about, first of all, that you didn't go the traditional pathway into teaching. Back when I became a teacher, and again, my first year teaching was 1988. I remember I graduated from high school at Webb City and went to college for years, became a teacher, and have been in the classroom ever since. And knowing that I would be a rarity now, that traditional path. Most people now are going into education or going through alternative certification methods like you have. And it's very different. But I appreciate also that you touched on that your personal background has a lot to do with those skills in working with children that maybe this sounds terrible, Joanna, but maybe somebody that's 22 years old like me when I first started teaching that didn't have kids at the time, I had the things I had to figure out that a mom coming back into a classroom might not. And so many times I can remember things that early in my teaching career back years ago, again, being a 22-year-old teacher and being in a classroom situation, that was the first time I was the adult in the room. It sounds terrible, but again, knowing it was just a different environment and even subtle things. I remember a veteran teacher told me, said, John, never let the kids call you anything but Mr. Turner. I've got 2 kids and my daughter is very different than my son, and things that motivates one will not motivate the other. And knowing that, let's just say it's a journey. So let's talk about that, Joanna. When you talk to people that are early career teachers right now, especially when we talk about discipline, what challenges are they talking about, or what things are they asking from you for, like resources and ideas that maybe we can front load with these people that are going to be teachers here in a year or 2 or 3? Maybe we can be proactive in saying these are some things to be watching out for when you get your first classroom assignment.
One of the things that I have found is how COVID really did affect the classroom. I was a teacher before and then I was a teacher after. And there really is a difference. I do a lot of research on the brain and how the brain functions, and even our attention spans as adults has decreased. And so a little bit later, I'm going to talk about prevention. And for me, as a new teacher in the classroom and as someone who works with new teachers and veteran teachers, I work with teachers across the career. I have teachers in my programs that have been in the classroom for 27 years, and we're having the same conversations that we're having with brand new teachers who haven't finished their degree yet. Last year, I had a 20-year-old that was a kindergarten teacher. She graduated with her associate's degree when she graduated with her high school diploma. And so they got her in a classroom and she's in her education classes. She turned 20 her first year of teaching. And so she also is, it's just crazy to me that we're having the same conversations no matter what, how long you've been teaching. So I think that's one of the things as I go through and talk about some stuff, these are the ideas that I have found. And in talking with people that I work with and talking with people who have been in the career, who have been successful in staying in the career, which is what we want, right? We don't want teachers to become teachers and then quit 2 or 3 years down the road. And what I'm going to talk about today is a lot about prevention, because if we can prevent the behaviors, then we never have to deal with the behaviors. And so that's what we have found just at the ATLL with all the people that I work with. A lot of the stuff that we have found is just preventing these behaviors and how to set myself up for success as a teacher in my own personal life, right? Right now, we are coming into everyone's prepping for testing. And what I like to tell my teachers is we like to think that we're all right here. My tolerance for shenanigans and the kids' shenanigans. And if we're equal, then I can pretty much tolerate it. Sometimes I go up a little bit and I can let go a little bit more things. And sometimes I go during this time of year, we see a really big shift where the teacher's tolerance for shenanigans is really low and the kids' shenanigans are really high. And so what do we do? How do we set ourselves up for success and learning when we have that big of a discrepancy? Unfortunately, with so many teachers still just being overwhelmed, you felt like you had a pretty good foundation. A lot of teachers right now are coming in, and maybe some of your kids or some of the students in your class right now in class learning and then going to school the next day and applying the things that they're learning in their classroom. And so they're, for lack of a better metaphor, they're building the plane in flight. And that's scary. I don't want to fly on a plane that's still being built. I want it done. And so it's just it's just scary. It
Yeah.
just is, and thankfully, I have some of that experience because that's where I was. I had the benefit of being a little bit older and having some I was a mom of an infant and a toddler, so at least having some kind of idea of what that looked like. Also, I'm a very type A personality. Like I like my boxes and I like my organization. So that's just how my brain works. And I think that benefited me some because again, my husband's a pastor, my dad was a pastor. I don't take shenanigans. We have things we got to do. So I don't know. Hopefully I'll be able to help out and give them some ideas of ways to prevent the behavior and then also some ways of what happens. What do I do when behavior happens?
Yeah. And Joanne, I think it's important for the students of Missouri State to even hear this conversation between us. Like I said earlier, again, being a former principal, I knew how much courage it took for especially a young teacher to come into my office as principal and say, I need help on anything. Okay.
Yeah.
But I think maybe even more on the discipline thing, because like you said, it is really for a veteran teacher, it is a challenge. I can even remember that I'm the same teacher all day long, but there would be second period would be a challenge, and I've got the same content fifth period, and things would be very different. And just knowing that the dynamic of the classroom, maybe the time of the day, like you said, maybe your energy level as a teacher, there are so many variables in there. And if you're trying to figure these things out, it is just very stressful. And so I think maybe even us talking about understanding that it's not going to be a cookie cutter. A strategy used today may not work next week, but knowing that, like you said, you use the term building the plane while it's flying. That's part of the comfort level of education. You have to get to that point where just knowing every day is going to be different. I can remember in the elementary school, the very first snow flurry of the year would throw, it'd take us 5 days to get back on track, just a
Yeah.
snow flurry. And just knowing that there are so many variables that can impact a child's classroom behavior. And again, as a teacher, it can be frustrating, increase your anxiety level. But again, hearing us having this dialogue, I think that's one of, and again, I've been around so long as a classroom teacher and as an administrator in the public schools in Missouri, is that I remember when my very first teaching job was at Lamont, which is a tiny little school district graduating class of 17 in central Missouri outside of Sedalia. And then I went to the big school of Ava in Douglas County. And I think what was really different about my generation of teachers was I think we had more time for collegiality. I don't know how to describe it to you. It was just, I can remember sitting in teachers' lounges. I don't even know if schools have teachers' lounges anymore, but I can remember going into teachers' lounges, not just to get your mail and not just to get a cup of coffee, but there was almost always another teacher down there and just talking about things. And not that we're picking on a student, but I can remember all these many years ago, there was a student that would do things for me in a positive way that would not for another teacher. And I remember this other teacher, and I was a young rookie teacher at the time. And this veteran teacher said, "How do you get George?" His name was George. I won't mention his last name, but how do you get George to do things for you? And part of it, and I know this sounds silly now, Joanna, and I don't, but I knew what George liked to do. I just knew what George liked to do. And by the way, one of the classes I taught was speech. And George was not a comfortable speaker. He did not want to go up in front of the classroom and speak. But even giving George latitude, I'd give him constraints, but giving him latitude on what topics he would choose to speak on, he was much less likely to want to speak on a traditional academic topic. For example, I remember a speech he gave one time on car tires. To this day, I think of him. I had no idea what the numbers on the side of a car tire were for, but George giving this informational speech, I can still remember him going through and talking about what all these numbers on the side of a tire meant. He was engaged by those kind of speech opportunities and he would participate in that. But if I would ask him to do something that I guess would be more traditionally academic, he would just say, "I'll take a zero." And again, when I mentioned that to that other teacher, again, it was just part of that collegial dialogue of each one of us have certain ones that we might be able to utilize that again, I think I don't think we have as much time for collegiality in our schools now. I think we do. We have much more structured professional development than I think we did. But
Right.
again, just having those professional conversations. Let me one other mention I'll just mention on this is I remember my very first principal's job was at Dora down in Ozark County, and Dora's a tiny little school district. Dora at that time would have one teacher per grade level at the elementary grade. So you had one second grade teacher, you had one third grade teacher. But at kindergarten, we had two. I'll mention this because some of the kids in class may be from Dora, but in kindergarten, we had two teachers. We had Ms. Wallace and Ms. Russell. And let's just say Ms. Wallace and Russell were both very veteran teachers. They had very different instructional styles, but they were both impeccably powerful teachers. They were fantastic at what they did. But I would have parents come in, kindergarten parents, and they'd say, "My child really needs Ms. Russell," or "My child really needs Ms. Wallace." The parents coming in knew because those teachers had been there so many years. And again, knowing that their instructional style, let's just say, based on what you've said, Joanna, Ms. Russell was very much like you. She did not, there was no time for shenanigans in Ms. Russell's class. And Ms. Wallace was much more of a hugger. And students would come into class, and she was a very different strategy. But again, both Ms. Russell and Ms. Wallace were impeccable, fantastic kindergarten teachers, beloved by their children. But for a young teacher, it might be confusing because they go through and say, "Am I like Ms. Russell or am I like Ms. Wallace?" And knowing that there's many ways that you can approach some of these issues, but there are some basic strategies that can really help get the start because you'll figure your path out as you go through. Every one of us that are teachers saying, "I did this my first and second year, but I'll never do it again." Sometimes we have to do things to learn what not to do.
Absolutely.
Joanna, I tell you what, we're going to take a break here. I'm going to stop recording right now, and then we're going to turn it over to you, and you can talk about your specific strategies with us, okay?
Great.